It was one of those nights where everything felt carefully staged. A high-end restaurant filled with low murmurs of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, and the soft melody of a piano in the background. Julia was radiant beside me, her dark hair pulled back elegantly, exposing the delicate curve of her neck. Her perfume, a light floral scent, drifted toward me every time she turned her head, filling me with a sense of pride. She looked every bit the woman who belonged at my side. My wife. It was a work dinner, nothing unusual for us. These dinners happened every few weeks, some client schmoozing, a chance to network, and an opportunity to show off the spouses. Julia was always good at these events. Charming. Witty. The kind of woman who could glide through conversations effortlessly, making everyone feel important. I'd always admired that about her, but tonight was different. I felt it the moment we sat down. I glanced around the table. Executives in dark suits, their wives or girlfriends in dresses that looked expensive but simple enough not to draw attention. The conversation was polite, a little forced, as these things usually were. I half listened to the man beside me drone on about some merger, but my attention kept drifting back to Julia, or, more specifically, to the way she was looking at the man across from her, Ryan. Ryan was a colleague of hers. A sharp guy, a little younger than me, ambitious, the kind who'd cut you down in the boardroom with a smile. I'd met him a few times before. Harmless enough. At least, I'd thought so, but then I saw it. The glance. Julia was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing her hair back in that way she did when she was nervous. The laughter, the hair, fine, normal enough. But her eyes, they lingered on him a second too long. There was something in the way she looked at him that made my skin prickle. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was there, an intimacy that felt wrong. It wasn't just the laugh. It was the way her body angled slightly toward him, the way she leaned in when he spoke, as if the rest of us had faded into the background. I took a sip of my wine, the bitterness clinging to my tongue as I swallowed. Maybe I was being paranoid. It had been a long week, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. But as the night wore on, the feeling wouldn't leave me. My eyes kept darting back to them, catching every subtle shift in their interactions. Another laugh. His hand brushed hers as she passed him the breadbasket. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. I felt my jaw tighten. I set my fork down, pushing my plate away as I tried to focus on anything other than the growing knot in my stomach. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe this was how colleagues acted, how Julia acted with everyone. But something was off. I couldn't deny it any longer, and then it happened again. Another glance. This one was unmistakable. Ryan said something, leaning in slightly, his voice low, and Julia's eyes flicked toward him, her lips curling into a smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. I'd seen her smile like that before, but it was for me. Or at least it used to be. Everything okay, babe? Julia's voice snapped me back to reality. Her head was turned toward me now, her eyes wide and innocent, as if she hadn't been hanging on to Ryan's every word for the last hour. Yeah, I'm fine, I said, my voice steady but flat. I forced a smile, but it felt wrong, fake. Just tired, I guess. Long day at work. Ryan chimed in, his tone casual, his smile easy as if he hadn't been cozying up to my wife the entire evening. There was something smug about him, though. Something in the way he looked at me that made my hands itch to clench into fists. You could say that, I replied, keeping my voice neutral, though I could feel the tension rising in my chest. I glanced at Julia again, watching her carefully as she picked up her wine glass, taking a slow sip. Her eyes flickered over to Ryan for a brief moment before she turned her attention back to the conversation at the table, but it was enough. I had seen it, another one of those looks. I was no longer imagining things. This wasn't paranoia, this was real. You know, we've been putting in crazy hours, Julia said, her voice a little too bright as she gestured toward Ryan. Ryan's been pulling double duty at the office lately. We've barely had time to breathe. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head modestly. It's been a grind, but you know how it is. Gotta keep up the pace if you want to make a difference. I'm sure, I muttered, barely listening to their words anymore. My mind was elsewhere, racing through every interaction I'd seen between them tonight. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Julia's laugh cut through my thoughts, and I felt the blood drain from my face as she leaned into Ryan again, her hand resting on his arm briefly as they shared some private joke. It was like I wasn't even there. I needed air. I couldn't sit there anymore, pretending I wasn't watching my wife emotionally slip away from me. Excuse me, I muttered, pushing my chair back. I stood up, the legs scraping against the floor, earning a few curious glances from the other guests at the table. You all right? Julia asked, her brow furrowed as she reached for my arm, her touch light and tentative. Just need some air, I said, my voice clipped. I'll be back in a minute. Before she could say anything else, I turned and made my way through the restaurant, my mind spinning with every step I took. The following day was overcast, the city draped in a heavy gray blanket that mirrored the weight on my chest. I could barely focus on my work, my mind replaying the scenes from the dinner over and over again. I had to know if my suspicions were valid. I needed proof that Julia was betraying me, so when she casually mentioned she was meeting a friend for coffee, my heart raced, and a sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Who are you meeting? I asked, trying to sound casual as I pushed my lunch around my plate, my appetite lost to the gnawing anxiety. A colleague from work, she replied, glancing up from her phone, her expression cheerful. Ryan and I are just grabbing coffee to go over some project ideas. You know how it is. Gotta stay connected, right? I said, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. I fought the urge to question her further. Instead, I nodded, pretending to accept her words while a storm brewed inside me. After she left, I grabbed my coat and slipped out of the office, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. I couldn't let her go without confirming my fears. I had to follow her. As I navigated the busy streets, my mind raced with thoughts. I kept telling myself this was just a friendly meeting, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. The images of her laughing with Ryan at the dinner replayed like a broken record, each moment driving me closer to a truth I didn't want to face. I arrived at the cafe, a quaint little spot tucked away from the main road. The kind of place where people sipped espresso and engaged in hushed conversations. I parked myself at a small table by the window, out of sight, yet close enough to catch every detail. As I waited, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. My heart raced as I watched the door. Moments later, Julia stepped inside, her face lighting up when she spotted Ryan sitting at a corner table. My stomach churned as I saw her rush toward him, her expression bright and inviting. It was as if I were watching a play unfold, and I was trapped in the audience, powerless to intervene. Hey, you! Julia exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement as she leaned in to give him a quick hug. Julia, you look amazing. Ryan replied, his voice smooth and flirtatious. I watched them exchange pleasantries, the chemistry between them palpable. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the cold metal feeling like a lifeline, and began snapping photos, my hands trembling as I captured their intimacy. Thanks. I just thought I'd dress up a little, Julia said, settling into the chair across from him. I wanted to make a good impression, you know. Always making a good impression, Ryan replied, flashing her a charming smile. You're the best at that. I felt my blood boil at his words. It was sickening to hear them laugh together, their bodies leaning closer. I focused the camera, snapping a photo of them both as they shared a private joke, her hand brushing against his arm. Remember that time we stayed late at the office, just the two of us? Julia asked, her voice light, but there was a glimmer in her eye that sent chills down my spine. We thought we'd never finish that presentation. Oh, I do, Ryan chuckled, leaning back with an exaggerated sigh. I thought you were going to kick my ass when I forgot the stats for that pitch. Julia laughed, tossing her head back, and I caught a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with, happy, carefree, and completely enthralled by another man. Honestly, it was kind of fun, Julia said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I never would have guessed we'd be able to pull it off. I thought we were going to crash and burn. Yeah, well, it's all part of the job. You always know how to make things fun, Julia, Ryan replied, his tone light but laced with an undertone I couldn't quite place. I watched, my breath coming in quick bursts as the conversation unfolded. It felt wrong to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know how deep this betrayal went. As they continued chatting, I overheard Julia mention an upcoming project, a work trip. I can't believe they want us to go to San Francisco next month, she said, her eyes brightening with excitement. Just the two of us. Oh, it'll be great. Ryan replied, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We'll have a blast, just like last time. You know, I've been thinking, we should celebrate. Just the two of us. It could be our little secret. That was it. My heart raced as anger surged through me, consuming any rational thought. I snapped another photo, capturing the moment. I had to have something concrete, something I could show her. She wouldn't just waltz through life like this while I remained in the dark. The coffee shop felt stifling, the laughter echoing in my ears as I tried to process what I was witnessing. I couldn't let them continue their charade. I had to confront her, and I had to do it now. Just as I stood up to leave, I heard Julia say something that made my blood run cold. You know, Ryan, I really love being able to talk to you like this. I just wish, her voice trailed off, and I leaned in, straining to catch her next words. Wish what? Ryan asked, tilting his head as if genuinely curious. Wish I could be this honest with my husband, she said softly, her voice laced with an emotion I couldn't place. I staggered back, shock crashing over me like a wave. Was this all some cruel joke? How could she say that? Anger, betrayal, and heartbreak collided inside me, making it hard to breathe. Julia, I said, the name barely a whisper as I realized I had to confront them. I could no longer be the passive observer. It was time to lay my cards on the table. Gathering my resolve, I pushed through the door, determined to face the truth head-on. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped into the cafe, ready to confront the reality I'd been dreading. The facade of the perfect life we'd built was crumbling, and I would be damned if I let her think she could keep me in the dark any longer. The dinner party was supposed to be a night of laughter, friendship, and good food. I had dressed up for the occasion, donning a blazer I hadn't worn in a while, hoping to bring a touch of elegance to the evening. But as I stood in our living room, my stomach twisted with the heavy knowledge I carried. I had spent the afternoon gathering my thoughts, preparing for the confrontation I knew I had to have with Julia. My heart raced, but there was no turning back now. The moment we arrived at the host's house, I could feel the tension radiating off me like a palpable energy. Julia was chatting and laughing with our friends, her demeanor bright and unbothered, while I struggled to keep my facade intact. I plastered on a smile, nodding at the small talk and passing drinks, but all I could think about was the truth I had uncovered. Mark, you're looking sharp tonight, my friend Dave said, clapping me on the shoulder. I forced a grin, but my mind was elsewhere. Thanks, Dave. Just trying to keep up with Julia, I replied, glancing at her as she threw her head back, laughter ringing out in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. She's the life of the party. I see you two are still the perfect couple, Dave said, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I nodded, a hollow feeling settling in my chest. As the evening wore on, I kept catching glimpses of Julia, her laughter echoing in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone else was in on some grand joke, one I was no longer a part of. My heart raced with a mixture of anger and sorrow as I watched her, carefree, spinning tales and charming our friends without a care in the world. Hey, can I grab you for a second? I said to Julia, my voice clipped as I led her to a quieter corner of the room, away from prying eyes and ears. Sure. What's up? She smiled, her face brightening, but I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. Can we talk? I asked, my voice low but firm. I need to address something serious. Her smile faded, and she glanced back toward the gathering. Is everything okay? You look a bit tense. Everything is far from okay, Julia, I replied, frustration lacing my words. I saw you with Ryan at the cafe yesterday. Her eyes widened, and I watched as the color drained from her face. What do you mean? You heard me, I said, the words pouring out like a dam had broken inside me. You were flirting with him right in front of my eyes. I saw the way you laughed, the way you touched him. Don't pretend it's nothing. Mark, please, it's not what you think, she said, her voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of a few nearby guests. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to shout, not what I think. I hissed, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with intensity. You want to know what I think? I think you've been lying to me, and I'm done being the fool. I wasn't lying, she protested, her voice wavering as panic flickered in her eyes. It was just a work meeting. We were going over projects. Then why did you say you wished you could be as honest with me as you are with him? I shot back, recalling the words that had cut me to the core. You can't expect me to just let this slide, Julia. I won't. Not anymore. A few guests looked over, whispers floating through the air as they began to take notice. I could see Julia's expression shift from defensive to desperate. Mark, please, not here. Can we talk about this later? Later? I scoffed, the anger bubbling up inside me. Why would I wait? You've already dragged this into public. If you thought you could keep this a secret, you were wrong. Can we just, she started, but I cut her off, unwilling to let her slip away from this conversation. No, Julia. This is happening now. I turned to our friends, forcing myself to speak clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for you all to know what's really going on here. A murmur swept through the crowd, eyes widening as I held up my phone. This is what happens when trust is broken, I continued, swiping through the images I had taken at the cafe. This is Julia, laughing and flirting with Ryan, her colleague. I showed the screen to everyone, the photos capturing the moments that would unravel our marriage. Julia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but I couldn't take my eyes off the shocked expressions of our friends. Mark, no, she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch as she stepped forward, but I couldn't stop myself now. You want to be honest, Julia? I said, my voice growing louder, fueled by a mix of anger and betrayal. This isn't just some work project. You've betrayed me, and I refuse to sit back and pretend everything is fine. Please, this isn't how it should be, she cried, tears shimmering in her eyes. It's exactly how it should be, I retorted, feeling the rush of adrenaline as I faced our friends. You all deserve to know the truth about the woman you've been cheering on. Dave stepped forward, concern etched on his face. Mark, man, are you sure about this? Maybe you should take it easy. Take it easy. I shot back, my heart racing. Do you think this is easy for me? Watching my wife throw away everything we built. The room fell silent, the atmosphere thick with tension as my friends processed what was happening. I could feel Julia's panic rise, her hand reaching for mine, but I pulled away, unable to bear her touch. Mark, please, she whispered, desperation coloring her voice. Let's go home and talk this out. I'll explain everything. I shook my head, the weight of her betrayal crushing me. No, Julia. We're done talking. You wanted to play with fire, now you're going to get burned. I'm not going to protect you anymore. With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, the cacophony of whispers trailing behind me. I left her standing there, the facade of our perfect life shattered, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and despair. I couldn't look back. I wouldn't. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a rush of freedom mixed with an undercurrent of grief. I had exposed her. But the real battle was just beginning, and I had no idea how far I would go to reclaim my life. The anger that surged within me was only the beginning, and I was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. The city felt different as I drove through its streets that night, shadows stretching longer in the glow of streetlights. I didn't know where I was headed, but I needed to escape the chaos I had unleashed at the dinner party. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, anger, and betrayal intertwining in a way that was nearly suffocating. But I couldn't ignore the resolve building inside me. Julia had crossed a line, and it was time to confront both her and Ryan in a way that would make it clear I wouldn't be pushed around anymore. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town had become my destination. It had been a place of memories for us once, a site of late-night adventures and whispered dreams. Now, it was the perfect setting for the confrontation that was long overdue. The looming structure felt heavy with secrets, much like my heart. As I pulled into the lot, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The setting sun cast an eerie glow over the empty lot, the silence pressing in on me like a physical weight. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching underfoot, and approached the entrance with a sense of purpose. Inside, the warehouse was dark and musty, the air thick with dust and memories. I navigated through the shadows, my mind racing with the various scenarios I had rehearsed. I was prepared for anger, for denial, but nothing could prepare me for what lay ahead. Suddenly, I heard their voices echoing through the vast emptiness. I paused, straining to hear the conversation. My heart raced as I stepped closer, the sight before me igniting a fire of fury. Julia and Ryan were standing near the far wall, illuminated only by a shaft of light filtering through a cracked window. Julia looked beautiful, her hair framing her face as she spoke animatedly, but all I could focus on was Ryan, his posture relaxed, leaning casually against the wall, a smirk on his face that sent a surge of rage through me. "I just didn't think he'd react like that," Julia said, her voice low but clear, laced with worry. "I thought we could keep this casual." "Casual?" Ryan replied, chuckling softly. "You really think he'd be okay with that? You're playing with fire, Jules. You should have seen the look on his face when you dropped that bomb. He looked ready to explode." I stepped out of the shadows, my fists clenched at my sides. "Explode is an understatement," I growled, my voice echoing through the vastness of the warehouse. Juliet spun around, her eyes wide with shock, while Ryan straightened up, his smirk fading into an expression of feigned innocence. "Mark, what are you doing here?" Julia stammered, taking a step back, her facade cracking. "I came to have a little chat," I said, my voice dripping with contempt as I fixed my gaze on Ryan. "A chat about you two and your little secret." "Mark, please," Julia said, desperation creeping into her tone. "This isn't what it looks like, not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "I saw the way you two were together at the cafe. It was clear you were both having a great time. Spare me the excuses, Julia." Ryan took a step forward, his tone condescending. "Look, man, you need to chill. Julia and I were just what? Sharing work ideas." I interrupted, my anger boiling over. "I've had enough of your pathetic lies. Julia, how long has this been going on?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted between me and Ryan, panic flashing in her expression. "Mark, enough!" I shouted, my voice reverberating through the hollow space. "You think this is a game? You think I'd sit idly by while you two laugh behind my back? I deserve the truth." Julia stepped closer, her expression shifting from shock to regret. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Ryan and it just happened. We were close at work, and it blurred the lines. I didn't want to hurt you, but you did," I replied, my voice quieter but no less intense. "You chose to betray me, to let this happen. Do you even realize the damage you've done?" "I know, and I'm sorry," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I made a mistake. I never wanted to lose you." "You should have thought about that before you started flirting with him," I shot back, glaring at Ryan. "And you, what kind of man preys on another man's wife? You should be ashamed of yourself." Ryan's face hardened, his facade of innocence dropping away. "Look, I didn't force her into anything. If anything, she's the one who wanted this. You can't pin this all on me." My blood boiled at his words, and I felt my hands ball into fists. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine without consequences? I'm not letting you off that easy, Mark, stop. Julia shouted, stepping between us as she turned to me, panic flashing in her eyes. Please, don't do this. Let's just talk about it. I shook my head, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. Talk. What's there to talk about? You've betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I won't let this go unpunished. Punished? Ryan laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the warehouse. What are you planning to do? You're just going to threaten me? You think you can scare me off? My gaze locked onto his, and I took a step closer, narrowing the distance between us. I'm not afraid of you. This isn't just about scaring you. It's about making sure you understand the weight of your actions. The tension in the air was thick, electric. I felt the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I prepared for whatever might come next. The fight wasn't just about Julia's betrayal, it was about reclaiming my dignity, about standing my ground. Mark, please, Julia begged, her voice trembling as she reached for my arm. This isn't the answer. I never meant to hurt you. I pulled away, the anger bubbling inside me. Then you should have thought about that before you threw everything away. I'm done with this charade. Just as I turned to face Ryan again, he moved in closer, fists clenched. You think you can just walk away from this? You think I'm going to let you ruin what we have? Enough! I shouted, my patience running thin. This ends now. Before I could react, he lunged forward, but I was ready. I sidestepped, dodging his attack, adrenaline surging through me. Mark, don't! Julia screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of our bodies colliding. I managed to throw a punch, catching Ryan off guard. He staggered back, but he quickly regained his footing, coming at me again with a fierce determination. Get off me! I yelled, shoving him back. The fight felt primal, driven by all the hurt and betrayal that had built up inside me. I couldn't hold back any longer. As we grappled, I could hear sirens in the distance, the faint wail of police approaching. But all I could think about was the anger and hurt that fueled me, the need to reclaim my life and confront the two people who had shattered my world. Stop! Both of you! Julia shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. This isn't going to solve anything, but we were too far gone. With each punch thrown and each word spat, I felt the walls closing in, the reality of my choices settling in. Whatever happened next would change everything, there was no going back. I was ready to face the consequences, but as the sirens grew louder, I realized I was also inviting chaos into a situation that had already spiraled out of control. In that moment, as I squared off against Ryan, I understood that my quest for revenge had led me to the brink of something much more dangerous. And as the darkness of the warehouse enveloped us, I couldn't shake the feeling that it would all come crashing down around us very soon.